Truly, things were more desirable when they were forbidden. Sarah Andrews knew that more than anyone else ever would. A year after her daughter Anna, boyfriend Miles broke up with her to focus on his career, he started working on the same architectural firm as she did. He was the newest employee, and he was put on her team. She did not want him there. She was still angry at him for breaking Anna's heart and making her daughter cry for several months. But that was not enough reason to ask her superior for a change of a team member, so she sucked it up and welcomed him to the team. Miles recognized her as soon as he saw her. After all, they had both had dinners together, and he had spent a few nights over at her house. And as soon as he had the chance to, he went over to say hi to her. But she treated him as though she had never set her eyes on him before he was hired. And it was not long before Miles got the memo. Just colleagues. In their team meetings, she barely paid him any attention, and she pretended not to see that he was interested in contributing to the meeting. That went on for a while, until one day, he blurted out what he wanted to say, and everyone in the room liked his idea, including Sarah. She began to include him in meetings, considered his ideas like she did everyone else's, and gave him actual tasks. Miles was brilliant. He aced every task handed over to him, and in no time, Sarah saw herself valuing him. She appreciated his efforts, and she saw how they positively affected their team's project. Then she began to run things by him, took him as her right-hand man, and rediscussed the decisions their team made with him. Sarah and Anna were more than mom and daughter. They were friends. And when the firm first hired Miles, she told Anna everything. Anna was okay with it. She had moved on from Miles, and she was happy that he finally got his dream job in a reputable architectural firm. But Sarah was pissed that Anna was not as bothered as her. When she took the news home, she expected Anna to match her thunder. But when her daughter acted cool-headed, she knew that she had to cut Miles some slack. It still irked her, though, that Anna was not at all bothered. The guy had left her to chase a career, as though he could not manage a relationship and a career together. If Sarah was being honest, she knew that her daughter was a lot to deal with. And if Miles was serious about chasing his career, then he was right to break up with Anna. Anna was the kind of girlfriend that threw a tantrum when her boyfriend took too long to respond to her texts. She was the kind of girlfriend that broke up with her boyfriend 3 times a week. She was the kind of girlfriend that drained and drained energy from her boyfriend until there was nothing left. So if Miles was really serious about chasing his career and climbing up the corporate ladder, he was right to leave her. But it still pained Sarah, because she was the one who spent nights in Anna's room, watching dumb chick flicks and consuming an unhealthy amount of ice cream. But since her daughter and her ex-boyfriend seemed to have moved past the breakup, who was she to dwell on it? So she moved past it as well and related with Miles, the way a boss would relate with a promising employee. But what got them close was a project for a demanding client. The client was a long-term one who had an outstanding relationship with the CEO of the firm. His projects always demanded high pressure and long hours, but he had never been assigned to Sarah and her team, until he was. They created multiple designs and brainstormed various ideas, but when Sarah presented them to him, he was not pleased. He wanted something spectacular, something captivating, and they had to go back to their desks. They had 3 meetings where they pitched various ideas to him, but he was against everything. After their last meeting, he had stomped out to their boss's office that they were wasting his time, and that the next time they pitched any nonsense to him, he would take his business some other place. Of course, the CEO pleaded with him to give them another chance and promised to get excellent results for him the next time. When he left, her boss descended on her with the same energy that the client had poured out on him. And as with the hierarchy of things in the corporate world, Sarah put pressure on her team as well. They worked long and hard that day, and they stayed even after the closing hours to finish off the tasks she had assigned to them. When they were done with the tasks, they handed them over to her to cross-check, and as such, she was the last person to leave that night. She thought she was alone in the office, and she removed her feet from her shoes and placed them on her table as she went through everything with extra care. The knock on her door notified that she was not alone. When she looked up and saw Miles, she took her legs off the table and asked him what he wanted. He said he only wanted to know if she needed any help. She looked over the pile of work on her desk, and she agreed that she did. Miles took the seat opposite hers, and they worked in silence for a long time, until they started making fun of their boss and the client. Sarah's laugh echoed as Miles did an apt imitation of the demanding client. They cross-checked half of the pile before they decided to call it a day. The next day, Miles still helped her after he was done with his job for the day. As they worked, they talked. And little by little, Sarah began to know Miles as someone other than her daughter's ex-boyfriend. She began to know him as more than a colleague. She found herself liking his personality. His booming laughter, which used to irritate her when he was with Anna, started to please her, and she longed to hear him laugh. When he handed files to her, she noticed his veiny hands, and when he drank water, she stared at his bulging Adam's apple. Sarah knew that she was attracted to Miles, and the more she tried to fight it, the more the attraction struggled to be acted upon. She also knew that it was wrong to want him, but it seemed things were more alluring when they were supposed to be out of reach. She wanted Miles so much until one day, she decided to have sex with him and get it out of her system. She was sure that if she slept with him once, she would be okay. So she kissed Miles one day in her office after work. Miles did seem shocked at the kiss, but not shocked enough to pull back or push her away. He kissed her back and let her roam her hands over his body until she unbuttoned his shirt. His hands went over her body as well as they panted and sweated in her office. But forbidden things did have a calling to them, and what she thought would be a one-time thing turned into a regular thing. They even went overboard and started booking hotel rooms since they could not continue having sex at the office. Neither of them spoke about what they were doing. They merely just met up, undressed, had sex, and went on their way. They did not talk about how it would affect Anna if she found out. They did not talk about what sleeping together meant for them. Talking complicated things made her fuck-up seem more phenomenal, so Sarah was more than happy to have an action-speak-louder-than-words scenario. But conscience could be a truly rigorous judge. And after she had sex with Miles almost every day after work and drove home to meet her daughter on the couch, she felt bad. She felt awful and she felt disappointed in herself. She was also worried about how Anna would take it if she found out. The thoughts plagued her mind in the nights, but the next day at work, she would still lust after Miles. The situation was getting tough for her and she needed someone to talk to. But the one person she confided in was Anna, and she definitely could not confide in her about that. So she kept quiet about it and let it haunt her in secret. Then one evening, as she left a hotel with Miles, she ran into her Aunt Cassie. She tried to hide because her aunt was a gossip, and she did not need her to go about telling everyone that she met her in a hotel with Anna's boyfriend. But Aunt Cassie had seen her, and she walked up to them. The worst thing about the entire situation was that Aunt Cassie also recognized Miles, and as she walked away, she gave Sarah a hot glare. But she said nothing about it until they met at a family event 2 months later. The family event was Sarah's brother, Ben's birthday party, and it was held in his home, about 20 minutes away from her apartment. Of course, she went with Anna. Anna had begun to notice that something was troubling her mom, and she asked Sarah severally what was wrong with her, but she said she was fine, and Anna let her be. She knew that whenever she was ready, her mom would talk to her about whatever was bothering her. If only she knew. Sarah's issue was that as much as she hated herself after she had sex with Miles, she still wanted to do it again the next day. And she wanted someone who would tell her that she was not wrong for lusting after her daughter's ex. She wanted to be told that what she did was not awful. She thought that if she maybe confided in someone else about it, she would feel better. Actually, what she wanted was for someone to tell her that she did nothing wrong by getting sexually involved with her daughter's ex-boyfriend. When Sarah and Anna got to the party, she caught her aunt and gave her side glances. And as soon as the woman could, she got her aside to talk about what she had seen the other day at the hotel. Of course, Sarah lied and told her that she was just there on a business meeting with Miles. Aunt Cassie was not fooled, but she kept her mouth shut until she got enough alcohol in her system. Alcohol flowed freely at the party, and in her distress, in no time, Sarah was tipsy from all the alcohol she had consumed, and she wanted to sleep. Anna took her upstairs to the room her uncle directed her to. The party was still ongoing, so he asked her to take her mom there and get back down if she would like to. She said she would, so she took her mumbling mother upstairs to the room, unbuckled her ankle-length boots, and placed them next to the couch before she helped her get comfortable for bed. She dropped a bucket next to her mom in case she needed to throw up later at night. And when she turned to leave, her mom slurred, "I love you, Anna." Her voice was so low, and it was muffled by the sheets on the bed, but Anna heard her, and she smiled at her, "I love you too, Mom." Then the girl went back downstairs to join the party. In the few minutes that it had taken Anna to take her mom upstairs and get her ready for bed, Aunt Cassie had already told her sister, Beverly, what she had seen in the hotel. And what made it even worse was that she said it with so much conviction, as though she caught them between the sheets. When Aunt Beverly heard it, her gasp was so loud that it alerted another family member, Ben's son, Lucas. Lucas got a hold of the story from Aunt Beverly and told it to another person, who then told some other relative. When Anna came back downstairs, the story had already gone around like the flu, and everyone paid extra attention to her as she strutted down the stairs. Anna's confidence reduced as she climbed down the stairs. Almost everyone was looking at her, and the ones who weren't were doing totally weird stuff, like Lucas, who was trying to pour a closed bottle of wine into the glass in his hand. At first, she thought something really bad had happened. Maybe someone died or something. Then it occurred to her that if someone was dead, Aunt Beverly would have been wailing. When she reached back downstairs, their gazes averted from her, and they tried to go on with the party. But they kept acting unusually robotic, and she had no choice but to demand that they tell her what happened. Nobody wanted to talk, so she grabbed Lucas's shirt, and he said he didn't know what happened. "For goodness sake, can someone please tell me why all of you are acting weird?" she cried out. And Aunt Cassie then blurted out, "Your mom might be having sex with your ex-boyfriend." As Anna released Lucas's shirt, Aunt Beverly slapped Aunt Cassie's hand and said, "Cassie!" Cassie rubbed the spot. "What?" The girl already knew something was up from the way you were all behaving. Aunt Beverly began to chastise Aunt Cassie and call her out for even spilling the secret in the first place. But Anna walked away from the party. She went back into the room where her mom was and slept on the couch. Sarah woke up some minutes before noon the next day. Her throat was parched and the room was empty. So she walked downstairs to the kitchen to get water. Most of her relatives had gone off to their houses by then, and only a few were scattered around as they helped Ben to tidy up his house. She said good morning to the ones she saw and ignored their weird stares. Was she the first person to get tipsy at a family event? What was it with the stares? When she walked into the kitchen, she saw Anna leaning on the kitchen counter, eating Fruit Loops straight from the box and watching TikToks. She drank water first before she asked her daughter, "Why aren't you helping your uncle tidy up?" Anna ignored her and continued to crunch the cereal, so Sarah went to her and playfully hit her side with her daughter's own. Then Anna groaned. Sarah was surprised. She did not know what could have happened to make her daughter pissed, and she did not even think that she could be the cause of the girl's attitude. So she asked, "What happened, Anna? Did I say anything last night?" Anna put some space between them before she said, "There is something I need to ask you. Can you promise not to lie?" Sarah was beyond confused, and the alcohol she took the previous evening, coupled with the attitude she was receiving from her daughter, made her head start to ache. And she said, "I promise. What's up? Are you or are you not sleeping with Miles?" Of everything Sarah had expected Anna to ask, that was the last thing she thought the girl would ask her. And she began to stutter. She looked at the kitchen entrance, and she could see some of their relatives peep in at them. She turned to Anna. "Please, let us not do this here." Anna let out a dry chuckle. "So, that's a yes. Wow." Sarah tried again. She stretched out her hand towards Anna, but Anna pulled away from her touch. "What I just don't understand is why you were so hell-bent on removing him from your team and then turn around to start sleeping with him in a matter of months." Anna looked really mad, and Sarah could not even blame her. She just kept pleading that they talk about it at home, but Anna ignored her and kept talking. Then Sarah said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know that you still like him." And Anna answered her, "I don't like him anymore, and that's not even the issue. The issue is that you, my mother, went behind my back to sleep with my ex-boyfriend. Why? Do you love him? What? Why?" The only thing Sarah could say was that she was sorry. She did not love Miles. She did not even want a relationship with him or anything of the sort. All she wanted was to have sex with him, and the sex ended up being too good that she could not stop. Even when she knew that it could drive a wedge between her and Anna, why didn't she stop? She had been dreading the day that Anna would find out about her and Miles. She thought that Anna would be mad and crash a plate in anger or something, but instead, the girl just looked genuinely disappointed, and the disappointment hurt even deeper than the anger would have. Finally, Anna shook her head at her and said, "Do you know how vile you look right now?" That was when Sarah's brother Ben came into the kitchen and asked the relatives who were at the door to leave. Then he told Anna, "Don't talk to your mother in that manner." Anna rolled her eyes, grabbed her phone, and said, "I can't even be in the same room as you right now." Then she walked out of the kitchen. As she left, Ben gave a reassuring pat on Sarah's back and left the kitchen as well. She sat on the stool and began banging her head in her hands. She had never seen her daughter look so disappointed. She did not even know how she would make it up to her daughter. Her head hurt and her eyes stung, and she wondered why she had gone ahead to act on her attraction to Miles's body when she knew the effect it would have on her relationship with Anna when the girl found out. Maybe, as desirable as forbidden things were, staying away from them was the right thing to do. Sarah knew that then. This morning, Old Brown woke up earlier than usual. For some time, he smiled because he dreamed of his former life, his big cozy house, wonderful garden, and sweet wife. Previously, Patrick Brown was a happy family man, lived in a decent place, and peacefully lived out his old age. But at one moment, everything changed. A terrible fire destroyed his house, and he lost his wife. Only Brown and his faithful dog Loki survived in that fire. Patrick's legs were severely burned, and he could only walk on crutches. The poor dog also got burned and was now very afraid of fire. Unfortunate Loki was shaking even when the old man would light a match to light his pipe. Patrick often regretted that he did not leave with his wife. It was so hard and bitter for him now to exist. He recently turned 72 and often wondered what lay ahead of him. After the fire, Patrick faced human injustice and callousness. The insurance company refused to reimburse the damage completely, and the old man had no one to turn to. All the many friends who often visited the Browns suddenly turned their backs on Patrick. Previously, Mr. Brown helped many, but when he needed help, it suddenly turned out that he was utterly alone. Patrick had a son, but communication with him was interrupted long before the accident, and even after the fire, his son blamed him for not being able to save his mother. Now, Oldie Brown lived in an abandoned trailer in a small forest near the town. No one lived nearby. The old man was alone and talked only to his dog. They had taken this dog from the shelter with his wife, so Loki reminded Patrick of his beloved wife. Patrick Brown remembered all the recent events, and the smile faded from his face. The day started with nothing good. His legs poorly hurt after the fire. The sun shone from the early hours, and strong heat waves began to heat up the metallic trailer. There was stuffiness all around the old man. The old man tried to move his legs. It still hurt to move. Loki immediately approached him and buried his muzzle into his palm. The dog was worried about his owner. Patrick stroked the dog and sat up in bed with difficulty. On that day, he was going to the city to send another letter to his son. The old man hoped that his son was just on a long trip, and one day he would read his father's letters and come to him. Brown was also worried about his dog. If he died, then what would happen to the dog? Because he would disappear. Old Brown cooked a simple meal and shared it with the dog. Patrick dressed in decent clothes and took a bag in which he put a letter and some money to buy food in the city. The dog always accompanied Patrick when he went to the town. It went with the owner on this day, too. The path was long and ran through the forest. It was challenging to move on crutches on a grumpy road. His old wounds began to bleed, but Old Brown tried not to pay attention to them. He needed to send a letter. The sun was merciless. Patrick looked at the sky. There was not a cloud. The old man was already far away from his trailer when he saw a small group of young people. Brown habitually ordered the dog to walk close to him. Young people saw an old man on crutches with disfigured legs and a dog with visible burn marks from the fire. For some reason, they thought it was amusing. Enticing each other, the guys made jokes about the old man's appearance and made fun of his dog. But Patrick did not answer, pretended not to hear their ridicule. He only wanted to quickly pass this company and reach the city. One of the guys got so cocky that he pushed the old man. Patrick Brown lost his balance and fell straight into the hot dust on the road. Faithful Loki pounced on the offender and bit him by the hand. Getting angry with this, the young people began to kick the dog and then attack the old man. Patrick yelled at them not to hit the dog, but the guys didn't listen. The old man covered his head with his hands, receiving blows to his body. A terrible wave of horror and resentment filled his heart, because Patrick had done nothing wrong to them, and he might not be able to send his letter to his son. Not even the pain of his bleeding foot could compare to that feeling of being lost in his pain. After beating the old man and his dog up, the guys picked up and shook out Brown's bag. A few dollars and a letter fell out from it. The young people took the money, and they threw the letter and the bag far into the bushes. Then the young lads laughed with joy and left. Old Brown lay in the dust for a long time, gathering his strength. Finally, he raised his head and softly called out to Loki. The dog was also beaten up for good. She limped over to her master and began to lick his face, whimpering softly. Loki felt guilty for not protecting his master. Brown stroked the dog, comforting her, and said that Loki was not to blame for anything. These young people were disasters, just as merciless and without human feelings. Brown asked the dog to look for the letter. It was unlikely that the guys had taken it. The dog understood the command and began searching. Finally, her joyful barking was heard from the bushes. Loki found the letter. The old man sat down and began looking for crutches. One was closer, the other lay far away. Brown crawled up to the first crutch. Loki saw that the old man was looking for a crutch and dragged the second of them to him. Patrick examined his crutches and thanked God that the young people had not broken them. Loki led the old man to his things. Patrick struggled to pick up the letter and bag from the ground. The bag was all dirty, and the letter was crumpled and also had dusty traces. But the old man did not give up the idea of going to the city. He did not want to give up and return to the trailer. This letter contained his hope. Patrick Brown and his dog walked on through the forest, which was getting thicker. There was an unusual silence. Birds usually would sing, but this time they were silent. This alarmed the old man. He thought trouble might be ahead. After all, the sun was beating down so hard that it could start a forest fire. Suddenly, Loki began to whine loudly and asked to go home. He grabbed the old man by the clothes with his teeth and pulled him in the opposite direction. After a few feet, Brown realized why the dog behaved restlessly, and he smelled burnt. A moment later, the old man saw intense smoke ahead and flashes of fire. There was a fire in front of them. Loki was very scared. It already knew the fire and was very scared. The dog began to tremble. Its legs began to be removed from fear. The old man petted the dog and went back to the trailer. A menacing crack and the terrible silence of the forest accompanied their path. There was more and more smoke, and it began to clog into their lungs, pinching their eyes. The old man was in a hurry, and because of that, his every step on crutches along the time went astray, and it turned out to move slowly. Brown feared not so much for himself as for his faithful dog. After a while, when the smoke filled almost the entire space in the forest, the old man could no longer walk his way back, and the fire got closer to them. There was a terrible dryness in his throat, and the old man regretted that he had not thought to take at least a bottle of water with him. His eyes were watering from the smoke. At some point, the old man realized he could not get out, but it was necessary to save the dog and send his last letter to his son. Patrick Brown leaned against a tree and breathed heavily. He called his dog and began to tell her to run to the city. Loki was an intelligent dog and would be able to get out. The old man tore off the handles from the bag and tied the letter around the dog's neck so the paper could be seen enough. Patrick hoped people would see this handmade collar and take the letter. Brown looked directly into the eyes of his dog and told her to run to the post office. So he repeated the word mail several times. Loki ran away from the old man, whining and returning to the owner over and over again. Loki was afraid to leave him there alone. The old man waved his hand, indicating that the dog should run faster. Patrick looked at his dog for a long time. He sat down near the tree and dutifully waited for either his death or salvation. He started falling into oblivion and saw his former life again. Everything there was flooded with light. Happy laughter was heard, his wife was still alive, and he was young and full of strength. A terrible crack woke the old man. The huge old tree that stood nearby, unable to withstand the power of the fire, began to fall. The heavy trunk broke thinner trees, flames danced on the bark and gnawed at the thin branches. The old man watched in horror as the fire got closer and closer. Healed burns ached even more. His body still remembered the fire that had deprived him of his former life. And now the fire has returned as if it came for another portion of his life and wanted to take the old man himself. Patrick Brown saw the inevitability of disastrous fire. If he had not met those young folks, he would have reached the city by now and been safe. But alas, he lost a lot of time and was beaten by them and could not move so fast that time. The old man no longer understood whether he felt the bitterness of the acrid smoke or whether it was human cruelty that was eating away his soul. Brown had one hope, that his Loki would remain alive and kind people would pick it up or even return to the shelter. Anything was better than dying there in the fire. And if you were lucky, Loki would be able to take his letter to the post office. The old man wanted that letter to reach his son so that he would know what happened to his parents. The fire was already surrounding the old man as if it was mocking him. Now he was pouring heat on his face. He stepped back, obeying the air currents. Suddenly, through the crackling, a loud barking was heard. Brown immediately recognized the voice of his dog. But why did Loki return? After all, he had to flee to the city. The old man began to cry. He realized that now the faithful dog would die with him, and with both of them, the hope of passing the letter to his son would die. The bark was getting closer. The old man wanted to shout for Loki to run away, leaving him there, but instead of words, only a wheeze came out of his mouth. Strong smoke had already intercepted his throat, not allowing him to say a word. Right through the fire, overcoming his fear, Loki jumped and began to lick Brown's face, and again he began to bark loudly as if calling for someone. Two men followed the dog through the fire. They were people from the forest, possibly lumberjacks. They picked up the old man and began to carry him out of the woods. Behind them, wagging his tail, Loki was running. The dog was happy that it was able to help his master. The old man silently cried. He did not even have the strength to thank his saviors. The lumberjacks took the old man straight to the city post office. Brown shook hands with them and thanked them in a low, smoke-hoarse voice. And so, Patrick Brown ended up at the post office. With trembling hands, he took the letter from his dog and dropped it into the mailbox. Elizabeth took the usual route back from her work to her house. The London streets were cold enough already. While her torn socks were doing no help in keeping her warm, she was wrapped in old shawls filled with patches as white fog blew out her mouth. Taking a basket of bread home, she was sure her younger siblings would be more than happy to see her with food. Rarely did they get freshly made bread at this hour. It was a delight to have food for the family. Summers brought weakness with the heat and lack of food, while winters were expensive because the town's poor people had to arrange warmth alongside food. She knocked on the door of the little house across the corner, and the wooden door opened in no time. "Lizzie's home!" the young blonde girl called out to the entire house, which had only one room and a lounge to spend their days in. Everybody gathered in the lounge quickly to welcome her. She was the family's bread earner. Two twin boys, 8 years old, came running out of their bedroom, where the mother had tucked them in. "Bread, Lizzie? Where did you get that from?" The mother greeted the boys. "Bakery round the corner, ma'am. Gave me a few pennies extra today," she replied with a smile as the kids around her made their way to the dining table. How delightful, May she gain health again. Lizzie's mother prayed joyously for her madam. She took the bread basket out of her hand and placed it on the dining table. Elizabeth hung her coats and scarves on the holder and went to the restroom to freshen up. They saved up little loaves for her, dividing the bread among the other 4 children. Elizabeth worked as a caretaker for the old lady around the block. She was ancient and could not even eat or move on her own. There were no children, heirs, or caretakers of Mrs. Walker. Her wealth was known to many people, as she was always careful about trusting no one. Yet she trusted Elizabeth, knowing that she had no interest in Mrs. Walker's wealth and only cared for the bit she could earn for her family with loyalty. She had also made her trust by being more than a servant. Elizabeth was the listener, genuinely caring and devoted daughter-like figure that Mrs. Walker could have wished for. She would often tell her to stay the night at her house as she missed him upon her departure. But Lizzie had a family home to return to. Mrs. Walker knew how much she loved them. One day, Lizzie woke up as usual early in the morning, getting ready to go to Mrs. Walker's house. She locked her house door and was warm within the shawls of her entire family. She started making her way to her work. There were plenty of things she used to do before the old lady woke up. She cleaned the whole house. The sweeping of floors often made Lizzie forget about the problems of her own life. She played the gramophone that held the most beautiful, calming music from the best musicians to her employer's playlist. Mrs. Walker could not hear far away, so she was never bothered with the symphonies playing as she overslept through the day. Lizzie was used to making breakfast precisely at the time when she knew Mrs. Walker would wake up, and she placed the freshly made bacon and eggs on the dining table. Placing tea and French toast on the tray, she took the breakfast to Mrs. Walker's bedroom. Usually, Mrs. Walker would be sitting upright by now. Having woken up, freshened up, she would be waiting for breakfast. But today, Elizabeth's knock did not welcome a beautiful smile in response. It held silence. Lizzie frowned but knocked again. The sheer silence bothered her, moving her to open the door at once. She did the same and found Mrs. Walker peacefully sleeping in her bed. Lizzie placed the breakfast on the table nearby. "Mrs. Walker," she called out, "it's mid-morning. Quite past your sleep time," she hesitantly said. Mrs. Walker did not respond, but continued her peaceful slumber. "Would you like me to bring in the breakfast later?" she asked, receiving no response. "Mrs. Walker?" she called out again, walking closer to her. This time, she sat on the bed and kept a hand on the lady's resting hand. The icy hand startled Elizabeth. Her eyes widened in horror. She placed a hand on her neck and another on her wrist. No movement at all. "Mrs. Walker," she whimpered, kissing her employer's hand and resting her hand on it. Not just an employer, but a close friend. Someone she dearly cared about had passed away. Lizzie informed the guards and the gardener, feeling worn out at having found the woman she so profoundly adored in this situation. She left the place in remorse, walking back to her house, feeling worn out. A few days later, Lizzie opened the knocking door. She had not found any new work. Instead, she was so upset she was not even thinking of work for now. But her family could not survive forever on their savings, and she was well aware of it. "Yes?" Lizzie greeted the man in the black suit. He was holding papers in his hand and seemed to have arrived from an office. "Elizabeth McQuoid?" "Yes," she responded with a slight frown. "I have some information for you," the stern man replied from within his heavy mustache. After sitting only 10 minutes with the man in her tiny lounge, she was left speechless. He had given her information that she did not know how to process. She only knew that her days had gotten rough after the demise of Mrs. Walker, but she did not know her departure was to bring her such news. "You're telling me she inherited all her wealth?" Elizabeth questioned with wide eyes. "Yes, all her wealth, to you," Mrs. Walker's lawyer informed Elizabeth of her query. "She wrote in her will that all her wealth should be given to you after her death," he confirmed with simpler words to help her understand. "But why? I was just her caretaker," she asked, not knowing how to respond. "Well, because she has no heirs, and she wrote that you would take the best care of her house and wealth, he explained. I'm sorry, how much did she asked hesitantly, still recovering from the shock. That's about 3 properties here in London and 2 in Liverpool, he generally answered. You will receive all calculations in a paper, but first I need you to visit the court for your inheritance matters. That's all I came for. Thank you for the tea, Miss McQuoid, he politely said, leaving for the door. She stood up in honor of the guest, watching him go out. Sitting back down in shock, she was unaware that her mother had heard the whole conversation. She hugged Lizzie with tears in her eyes. Finally, the days of her poverty were over for good. The next day, she visited the court with him for the given hours. The lawyer waited in line before he got called out by a few people staring at Elizabeth. She soon could feel the environment and the lawyer's facial expressions change. She knew something was wrong. They appeared before the judge as he called on them and showed him the documents. Upon questioning by the judge, the people staring at Elizabeth earlier got up. My clients are the true heirs of Mrs. Walker. Here are the documents proving the same. Another man, looking like the lawyer presenting them, said, giving the judge's clerk the documents. As quickly as the dreams were made, Elizabeth could see them falling apart. She looked at the people, uncertain whether she even had the right to the wealth she claimed. They got out of the courtroom, and Mrs. Walker's lawyer looked at young Lizzie, perplexed at the situation. I do not believe them, nor does the judge. Their papers seem to be fraudulent, the lawyer sternly replied. She could not understand a word. The days for her were as unreal as they could get. What now? She questioned him for guidance. The middle-aged man looked furious at the situation that had risen in front of him. We'll fight the claim, he replied with determination. The thought of Lizzie's family flashed back. She had to take care of them. She could not get herself caught up in the mess of court issues. I can't. I'm too weak for this, she whispered, looking down. There was no one in eternity she could build confidence to visit the courtrooms regularly, fight issues, and people who came questioning her. You are the only person she wanted to have the wealth. I can't be disloyal to my client, not even when she's no longer with us. He looked at her. The lawyer's loyalty gave rise to fire in Elizabeth. She questioned herself about becoming disloyal to her employer now that she was dead. Elizabeth, you are my only family. Lizzie recalled the words once spoken by Mrs. Walker herself. The days and nights passed for Elizabeth in the quest of gaining the verdict from the court. Mr. Oliver, the lawyer, left no stone unturned to help her fight the claim. The young Lizzie grew a century in wisdom and faith. There was no lack of confidence and hesitation she could find in herself now after months of going back and forth to the courtroom for the wealth she believed she righteously owned. She would often pass in front of the house of Mrs. Walker, missing the residence as if it was her place of living. Soon enough, she found a job in a boutique around the block. It brought her no joy, but gave her much relief as she could earn far better and support her family. What do you think will happen today? Mr. Oliver questioned, piling his papers in the courtroom. It was the last day of their hearing, and the verdict was supposed to be announced today. Whatever happens, I'm sure Mrs. Walker would be happy we put up a fight, she smiled, looking at him. That's the spirit. He patted her head. She had lost a dear lady but found a friend in Mr. Oliver who truly supported her and whose loyalty she could vouch on. She knew no matter what happened, he had her back. They stood up as the judge entered his place of seating, impatiently. She waited for them to present their arguments and held her breath for the verdict. The will of Mrs. Walker clearly states the inheritance transfer. Hence, I announce Ms. Elizabeth McQuoid as the legally entitled person to Mrs. Walker's wealth, the judge announced. The words were like music from Mrs. Walker's gramophone. They brought peace to a turmoil she had been fighting for a long time. Everyone stood up. Mr. Oliver shook her hand, congratulating her on the win before she hugged him at their success. She was happy to go home with the victory of truth and the spirit of not feeling insecure. The turmoil had turned her wise. She was no longer the young Elizabeth, scared and only wanted the best for her family alone. She had more significant motives to live for. She was aware that her wealth, as Mrs. Walker would have desired, should be used only for the well. She walked out of the courtroom, richer by pocket and richer by heart. She closed her eyes as she let the pain set in, trying fruitlessly to hold back the tears that threatened to fall from her face. She has to concentrate on not crying out loud as she remembers her late mother's words. Think of all the bright places, and you won't need to cry. She tried to think of ice cream, but was distracted by another heavy laugh from her cousin Ella, bringing her back to reality. This time, she lets the tears fall heavy. Her auntie's last sentence is something she never wants to hear again. She watched as Ella ran inside with glee, coming back with a bucket of cold water, always joyful to see her suffer. Her hatred for her started immediately after being introduced to the family as her cousin. Since then, she has promised to make her life a living hell. She hurriedly got up, shaking as her auntie ordered. She did not want to enact her anger further. She commanded to pour the water on her body. Ella smiled as she gladly obeyed her mother. This has become an everyday ritual, as she stopped flogging her, but has discovered other ways of reminding her how useless her life is with just words. She laid on the cold, bare floor for 30 minutes before she dragged her ragged self to the girls' room on the command of her auntie, crouched at her favorite position behind the door where she consoled herself. Ella came in and ignored her as she went to dress for school. With her head sunk between her knees, she hastily looks up at the sound of Ella telling her mum how beautiful and well-equipped her new school was. "And who do you expect to pack those clothes? You had better get up now before I descend on you again." She hurriedly brushed past her and began folding the clothes she washed yesterday. "You should be ashamed of yourself. Do you see your mate going to elementary school at this age?" She hissed and went inside. The tears on her face had dried up as she finished folding the clothes on the table. "My name is Jade Adams, the only daughter of Luke and Linda Adams. I am an orphan living with my auntie and cousin." These words are the first thing she learned how to spell and pronounce. She opened her wardrobe, and the fleet of mosquitoes seemed to be her enemy at that point. She vented her anger toward them by killing as much as possible and forgetting her sorrow. When the rest had managed to escape, she looked down at the rags she called clothes, all jumbled up and messy. She looked at Ella's side of the bed, tidy as always. Her auntie had rather beat her every day for her tardiness than teach her how to fold them. Having no idea what to wear, she poured all her clothes onto the floor, looking for something nice that could at least cover all the marks on her body. She went on with her morning duties of washing, scrubbing, and mopping the floor. "It is not my fault that I am too old for elementary school," she thought within herself after losing her parents at an early age. Life became a nightmare as she moved from one orphanage home to another. She sighed and sat down, leaning on the bed only Ella slept on. "I once used to sleep on a bed like this before my parents died," she said. "I wish they didn't travel, leaving me alone. Maybe if I had gone with them that fateful day, the death that took them away would have taken her too. Is it not better to die with them than to be alive and subjected to this mockery?" Her father, Mr. Luke Adams, was one of the best painters in a small village in North Idaho. He was a good man who devoted his time to his work and family, trying everything possible to provide for his lovely young wife and their only child. She can still remember how her mother met her father, as they have told this story repeatedly. They attended the same community church and volunteered to help the needy in their community. When her father introduced her mother to his parents, it was unsurprising to both families as they had patiently waited for them to do so. The marriage was a small gathering where they invited close relatives of both families to rejoice with them. Life for the two lovebirds was a bed of roses as things were moving on fine. When Jade was born, her father promised to send her to the best school, as he was not privileged to live out his dreams, Maybe through Y, he said, I can finally accomplish that. He then told her of his dream to become a neurosurgeon. She immediately promised him that she would help bring that dream to reality, since her dreams are also to become a neurosurgeon. The death of her parents later scattered those dreams. The driver was here. Her auntie screamed at Ella, "Finish your food in the next 5 minutes, or you are going to school with an empty stomach." As she began dishing food into her plate, she has been starving for the past 2 days because she mistakenly burnt her auntie's gown. She looked up to her auntie, expecting to see sympathy in her eyes. Maybe she would pity her and give her some food to sedate her rumbling stomach. She frowned as 2 slices of bread fell onto her plate. "You should be lucky I gave you something to eat, as I don't want you to die on us, because if you do, who will be cleaning and doing the house chores?" Before the death of her parents on her 5th birthday, she had wished for a long life, a beautiful house with 2 brothers and sisters. Maybe the wish fairies are sleeping, as she can't remember her wishes being granted. She went to the bedside shelf in the room. It contains most of her stuff, so she practically calls it her own. Ella hardly sleeps in the room with her. She prefers sleeping with her mom, but mostly comes to the room to dress up, or occasionally, when they are friends for a few seconds, chats with her. She pulled out the case containing her undies and brought out an old family album containing the pictures of her mom, her dad, and the life she once knew. She glanced through the photos, especially the one taken on her 5th birthday. With tears in her eyes, she promised to make them proud. As lonely as she was, she has this soothing feeling whenever she glances through the album, as she reminisces on the life she once had and thinks of the one she wishes to have. "Jade," her auntie called. As she hurriedly went to answer her, "You decided to keep me waiting." She shook her head vigorously. "No, Ma." She pointed to the chair beside her. "Wash these clothes and iron them very well. If you like, burn them. Ella and I are traveling tomorrow for an important occasion in New York. I need them thoroughly ironed." She hurriedly washed the clothes and spread them to dry. The following day, after her auntie and Ella left, she went over to Williams, as she could not wait to share the great news with him. Williams is an orphan like her, but unlike her, he is privileged because the family that adopted him is childless, so he is well taken care of. Williams has been her secret tutor since he found out that she has a passion for school and is always impressed by how an intelligent girl like her has been denied the privilege of going to school. She told him the news of her auntie traveling to New York with her daughter. Months ago, Williams helped her register for a scholarship program organized by his school for the less privileged children who can't afford primary education. The scholarship scheme covers from elementary education to the university stage. With the help of his mother, a high school teacher, William could narrow out the type of questions they would be asked during the exam, helping her master each question. She has been giving her very best, knowing fully well her future and the chance of her leaving the hellhole that faith has brought her solely depends on whether she succeeds. She became more focused and utilized every opportunity she got to practice and solve every quiz Williams gave her. Her auntie traveling for a few days gave her an edge over the situation, as she fully dedicated time to study. On many occasions, Williams has asked her about the relationship between her and her auntie. She has not been able to give him any detailed information as to how she was related to her, because whenever she asked her auntie if it was her father or mother, she was told to, it always ends with silence, as her auntie has to refuse to explain to her who she was related to. All she could remember was being one day in the office of the Miss, the lady in charge of the 3rd orphanage she was staying after the death of her parents. When she got to the office, she met her auntie, who claimed to be related to her, with a picture of her parents and her smiling happily. She hurriedly followed her, thinking that her life would change. She saw her parents smiling happily with her, but she never knew that she would be treated as though she was still in the orphanage. Jade kept counting every hour of the day until the competition day. Having prepared herself well, she prayed to God and reminded her guardian angel to help her succeed, as her future depended on her passing this scholarship exam. She had been consoling herself with the success story since Williams told her about the scholarship. She came to the exam venue in the company of Williams, who kept reminding her to have faith in herself, as he was very confident she would be among the selected candidates. A few months after she took the scholarship exam, life returned to how it was before. Her auntie continued with her behavior, and Ella was hers. Every day without hearing from the school, she keeps losing the small hope she has been holding on to. 8 months after the exam and a new academic session had begun, the school pasted the names of the selected candidates. Williams, on seeing her name boldly written as number 3, couldn't wait for the school to dismiss. He packed his books inside his bag at the sound of the bell and ran home as fast as his legs could carry him. With joy in his heart on seeing her, he screamed her name at the top of his voice. "Jade! Jade! Jade!" he screamed. She ran over to him, asking why he was running like something was after his life, getting closer to him. He saw the cheeky smile he was trying very hard to hide on his face, and immediately she knew that the scholarship result was out. "Did I get selected?" she asked him. "Yes," he answered, nodding his head. Hot tears rolled down her eyes immediately after he confirmed what she already knew in her heart. When Jade got home, she met staff from Williams' school, sent by the scholarship board, already discussing with her auntie. He came to inform Jade that she was among the selected candidates and will be joining them immediately. He apologized for the delay in pasting names and communicating with all the selected candidates. They had a hard time choosing the best candidate for the opportunity. He further explained what the scholarship program covers: her tuition fee from elementary and high school to university, accommodation, and a certain amount of money every month. Also, upon successful graduating from university with good grades, a well-paid job will be waiting for her. Jade couldn't be more grateful to God for answering her prayers and to Williams for helping her succeed. With her bags fully packed immediately, she bid her auntie and Ella farewell and promised to check up on them whenever she could afford it. Even though they mistreated her, she told herself, "I have promised not to allow their attitude towards me to reshape my life and future." She closed her eyes as they drove past her auntie's house, remembering her late mother's words and wishing both her parents were here to share in her joy.